Good morning, everybody. I'm Oliver Carston from the University of Leeds and European Transport Safety Council. I'd like to welcome everyone to this conference, both here in the room and virtually. So we're delighted to welcome guests back again to the annual International Road Safety Conference following the 2-year break due to the pandemic. I understand the last time the conference was due to take place, it was postponed in the 11th hour as the epidemic was just getting started. So we're pleased you could join us here today. Today's conference will look at the theme of speeding. The government's road safety strategy for 2030 was launched last year, and in it the strategy recognised 7 priority areas for guiding Ireland's journey towards Vision Zero, one of which was safe speed. It is with this in mind that we will today look at speeding and will feature speakers from home and abroad who will share best practice in addressing the issue. Speed management is a topic very close to my heart. It is an area in which I've been carrying out research for over 20 years, particularly on intelligent speed assistance, which is the in-vehicle system for speed management, and which is now required on all new vehicle models being sold in the EU. So we have a full agenda of really interesting content, and I'll quickly try to get the show on the road. So before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to give you a brief overview of today's schedule. The conference will be broken up into 3 sessions where we will hear from our speakers. We will break for refreshments after the first session and then host lunch after the second. The virtual speakers or virtual attendees will have to manage without that. We will then have our third and final session with the conference finishing around 3:30 p.m. We will hold a question and answer session before we break for lunch and again at the end of the program of speakers. Those online can submit their questions using the question box, and that will be monitored throughout the event. We will do our best to give answers to all of them. We do, of course, want people to network, and there'll be an opportunity to do so during the breaks. I would ask you that you all put your phones on silent, but please don't turn them off. We encourage you all to share your thoughts on social media at RSA Ireland using the hashtag #RSA Conf 2022. I hope you have that on the program. All of today's presentations will be available for download on the Road Safety Authority website, rsa.ie. I would like to make you aware of the fire exits to the rear and front of the conference hall, behind, and obviously it's on my right, your left. Restrooms are located just outside the conference hall. So to kick off, I'm delighted to introduce Ms. Liz O'Donnell, Chairperson of the Road Safety Authority. Liz is a former politician, having been first elected to the Dáil in 1992, where she served as TD for Dublin South until 2007. She served as Minister of State at the Department for Foreign Affairs from 1997 to 2002. Liz has been a champion for the RSA since 2014. Liz.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Oliver. And can I say, on behalf of the Road Safety Authority, we're very grateful that you agreed to chair today's conference for us. As Professor of Transport Safety in Leeds University, your participation today really elevates our experience, and thank you again. Minister Naughton, delighted you could be here today to speak and to open the conference. Commissioner Hillman, fellow RSA board members, members of the emergency services, members of the Oireachtas, I believe, are here also today, and many of you in the room are very interested and committed to road safety, so I thank you for that. It's great to be able to gather in person, actually, once again, for the annual conference. I want to thank all of the speakers participating in today's conference, and especially those who have travelled from abroad to share their knowledge and their expertise. The conference provides us I think, with an important opportunity to reflect on national and international best practice. And this year we're going to focus on the age-old difficulty and problem of speeding. The insights shared today, I hope, will inform our policy and our interventions and ultimately enhance safety on our roads. This shared collaboration with international actors and at home is essential as we try to implement the new road safety strategy, the new government road safety strategy, which runs until 2030. And the ambition of that is to have road fatalities by the end of this decade. And of course, that's as a stepping stone to the ambitious target of eliminating deaths and injuries altogether by 2050. That's our zero target. Today we'll hear presentations from experts at home and abroad, including the Road Safety Authority, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the HSE, Ireland's Love 30 campaign, and we'll hear testimony from the Irish Road Victims Association. Donna is here today, welcome Donna, on the devastating impact that collisions have on families. And Donna Price is also a member of our board of the Road Safety Authority. So our interest and commitment to responding to the trauma caused to families by road crashes is ongoing, and we are determined to continue that on the board. So we're also joined virtually by Dr. Judy Fleiter, Global Manager with the Global Road Safety Partnership, who will discuss the motivations for speed choices on the road. I'd like to also draw your attention to Guro Iranes, Director of Road Traffic Safety, Norwegian Public Roads Administration, who is here this morning, who will guide us through Norway's impressive and effective approach to tackling speeding, with a particular focus on graduated speeding. We know here in Ireland that when we put our minds to it, we can make our roads a safer place. During the pandemic period, we showed society's capacity to adapt, and we made real and positive changes to the way we drive and the way we live. For example, through the implementation of wider footpaths and extra segregated cycle lanes in many towns and cities across the country. So that is one good legacy from the pandemic, and we need to keep that same spirit of innovation and initiative alive, so we can make the vision of a livable urban areas a true reality for generations to follow. So key to this is the safe systems approach, which is the core of the new road safety strategy. The safe systems approach, I think, and it needs to be explained to members of the public, because I would like the strategy to be a people's project and for people to understand where we're going with road safety. It's no longer about blaming the driver or the road user. It's about international best practice to emphasise the need to focus and make changes to all elements of the road traffic system, not just the road user, and to successfully improve road safety. And there are seven safe system intervention areas in the strategy, and they are safe roads and roadsides, safe speeds, safe vehicles, safe road use, post-crash response, safe and healthy modes of travel, safe work-related road use. So you see it encompasses as a kind of a comprehensive, integrated approach to dealing with the issues important to road safety. One of the primary interventions, and that's what we're here today to discuss, is safe speeds. Measures to reduce speeding are being implemented across enforcement, engineering, education. Our national policies are being reviewed to support these areas. For example, policies to support modal shift away from the cars towards more safe, active travel. Another example is the work that's underway to review our speed limits, which is badly needed, which includes moving towards the introduction of a 30 km/h limits as the default in urban areas. Over the lifetime of the government road safety strategy, vehicle technology too will change dramatically. Ireland advocated strongly at European level for the introduction of life-saving technologies associated with the EU General Safety Regulation, including intelligent speed assistance and direct vision for commercial vehicles. The RSA is already actively promoting new technologies in vehicles such as e-call, automatic anti-lock braking system, emergency stopping, and lane departure features to consumers who are considering buying a new or a used car. ISA, or Intelligent Speed Assistance, is a game changer. This technology has the potential to dramatically reduce road traffic injuries and fatalities. The technology can ensure that vehicle speed does not exceed a safe or legally enforced speed. In cases of potential speeding, the driver can be alerted or the speed reduced automatically. From July 22, ISA will be mandatory for new models of vehicles introduced on the market. Importantly, it will become mandatory for all new cars that will be sold from July 2024. Speed continues, unfortunately, to be a contributory factor to fatal collisions in Ireland. Analysis of Irish coronial data shows that during 2014 to 2018, 1/4 of driver fatalities, with a record of their actions available, were exceeding a safe speed. Recent survey research conducted by ourselves, the RSA, found that 1/3 of drivers admitted to exceeding 50 kilometres per hour speed limits by more than 10 kilometres per hour, at least sometimes. The same research found that just under 1/3 of drivers reported exceeding 100 kilometre per hour speed limits by more than 10 kilometres per hour, at least sometimes. So sadly, and we have to face this, some people, and these can be otherwise law-abiding people, still have a blasé attitude to speeding in Ireland. There's a perception amongst a cohort of drivers who believe that they're good drivers, that they are skilled enough to handle the road, and that this justifies driving at an inappropriate or excessive speed on roads they know like the back of their hands. This is the usual Irish explanation. I know the road well. I can handle speed on this road. They're wrong. They're not good drivers. A good driver is one that understands that speed increases the likelihood of a collision occurring, and if a collision occurs, speed determines how severely injured those involved will be. A good driver drives at an appropriate speed for the conditions and obeys the speed limit to protect themselves, other drivers, and especially vulnerable road users. This conference on speeding, therefore, is timely. So far this year, unfortunately, there have been 123 lives lost on our roads, which is an increase of 12 from this time last year. This is extremely worrying for all of us, especially as we head into a high-risk bank holiday weekend. Therefore, measures like the fines, the increasing in fines for certain road safety offences, including speeding, which Minister Naughton is announcing today, are really welcome and overdue and should help halt this upward trend in crashes and fatalities. I do hope you enjoy today's conference. I look forward to reconnecting with many of you during the breaks. Thank you for your attention. And I hope you have a nice and successful day at the conference. Thank you.
So the next speaker, I hope, needs no introduction. It's Minister of State Hildegard Norton.
Thank you, Oliver. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I think after a 2-year pandemic-induced break, it's great to have so many esteemed conference speakers here in person. And I think it's a very timely conference to have. And I welcome you all here and thank you for your attendance this morning. The theme, as Liz has said, of this year's conference, it focuses on tackling speeding and examining the risk factors involved and the interventions needed to address high-risk road safety behaviour. Ensuring that motorists drive at safe speeds on our road network is one of the 7 priority areas for guiding Ireland's journey towards the ambitious Vision Zero objective, and zero fatalities and serious injuries on our roads by the year 2050. While this is a challenging target, I sincerely believe that if each and every one of us plays our part, together we can achieve this target. Unfortunately, the need to tackle the tendency of certain individuals in our community who take risks and exceed the nation's speed limits is as urgent now as it was 20 years ago when penalty points for breaking the speed limits were first introduced. Although we have come a long way in that time, and I think it's important to acknowledge the achievements, regrettably, the scourge of speeding on our roads with all the inherent dangers that such reckless behaviour poses to us all is still sadly with us today, and it clearly needs to be addressed. Tragically, speeding continues to be the leading cause of road collisions, serious injuries and fatalities, both here in Ireland and internationally. And we have to redouble our efforts and continue to strive to educate all members of society on the dangers associated with speeding and to eradicate this dangerous activity as best we can. As a government, we must be unequivocal when it comes to tackling speeding on our roads. It's a serious offence that puts lives at risk. Worryingly, in 2021, the RSA carried out research. It was a survey on driver attitudes, and Liz referred to it there earlier, where 30% of most motorists, that's almost 1 in 3 motorists, think it's acceptable to exceed the 50-kilometre speed limit by more than 10 kilometres. When I, together with the Road Safety Authority and An Garda Síochána, launched the government's Road Safety Strategy 2021 to 2030 in December last year, we each committed to delivering on the 50 high-impact and 136 support actions needed to ensure that Ireland is best placed to achieve our 2030 interim target of reducing fatalities and serious injuries on our roads by 50% on our way to the Vision Zero. Of course, tackling the problem of speeding is just one of the key road safety strategy actions that we have to deliver on if we are to achieve this objective. And that's why, for the first time since the introduction of penalty points and associated fines for speeding almost 20 years ago, that I'm announcing from a minute after midnight tonight, we will be doubling the fixed charge penalty for speeding from €80 to €160. Including speeding in all, some 16 high-risk road safety offences will see a doubling of the fixed charged fines associated with them. In addition to speeding, other high-risk offences that will see a doubling of fines will include using a mobile phone when driving, not wearing a seatbelt, and failing to ensure that a child is properly restrained. Fines for these offences will double from €60 to €120. Also acknowledging the fact that learner and novice drivers, by virtue of their inexperience, are at a higher risk of being involved in a collision, I'm increasing the fines for certain offences in these areas. Specifically, the fine for a learner permit holder driving a vehicle unaccompanied by a qualified person will increase from €80 to €160 from midnight tonight. In addition, the fine for learner and novice drivers found not to be displaying their L or N plates or equivalent tabards in the case of motorcyclists will also increase from €60 to €120. Fines will also be doubled for other offences that put the safety of vulnerable road users at risk. For example, the fine for motorists failing to stop for a school warden will double to €160. I'm also introducing 3 new fixed charge penalties for offences which will come into effect early in the new year. In the case of these 3 new fixed charge penalties, a short amount of time is needed to allow An Garda Síochána the necessary time to update their systems to accommodate the issuing and the recording of these new fines. So these 3 new offences will include the fraudulent misuse of a disabled parking permit. This offence will incur a fixed charge penalty of €200. Parking in an electric charging bay for anything other than the intended purpose of charging an electric vehicle. This offence will incur a fixed charge penalty of €80. The offence of breaching a heavy goods vehicle ban and entering a specified public road without a valid permit. This offence will attract a fixed charged penalty of €200. As I mentioned, most of the fines associated with these traffic offences have not increased since they were first introduced, in some cases nearly 20 years ago. Fines have not kept pace with inflation, and over the years their deterrent effect has increasingly waned. Increasing the fines for these road safety offences will act as a stronger deterrent to those who break our life-saving rules of the road. I should point out that the increases I've just mentioned relate to fines that are paid within 28 days of receiving a fixed charge notice for an alleged offence. If a person fails to pay the fine within this period, and depending on the offence, it will increase to a new higher level of either €180 or €240. You then have a further 28 days to pay this fine. If you fail to do so, it increases further to a higher level of either €240 or €320, again, depending on the offence. So, to illustrate, if you are now detected speeding, you will receive a fixed charge notice penalty fine of €160. Fail to pay this within 28 days, and it increases to a new higher fine of €240. If you fail to pay this increased fine within another 28-day window, it will increase to a new higher fine of €320. RSA research from last year shows that most Irish people are in favour of increased penalties for offences such as speeding, mobile phone use, and for not wearing a seatbelt. Everyone wants safer roads, and the changes taking effect at midnight tonight are very much a step in the right direction. Against a backdrop of an increase in road deaths to date this year, they are certainly necessary to help to reverse this worrying trend. And while I acknowledge the need to increase the number of penalty points attributable to these offences, this will take time as legislative changes are required, which the Oireachtas must ultimately approve. By contrast, increasing the amount of fines imposed is something that can be done with immediate effect and which can deliver instant results. When talking about speeding in any context, we have to remember our vulnerable road users who are most at risk of serious injury or worse at the hands of speeding motorists. We all know and can see for ourselves every morning and evening how children and teenagers are using busy roads as they make their way to school with their parents or caregivers. And I was delighted to be able to support the Safe Routes to School programme again this year. This invaluable multi-pronged initiative continues to facilitate safer walking and cycling routes within our communities. It helps to alleviate congestion at our school gates and increases the number of students who feel secure in walking, cycling or scooting to school. The government and its agencies will continue the commitment to create safer routes for schoolgoers and better access to active travel routes for all of our schools right across the country. Ireland's current road safety strategy outlines safe speeds as one of the key priority intervention areas for the next 10 years. And as we continue to implement the high-impact actions that will build on our road safety efforts, I'm delighted to see the emphasis on today's agenda of the 30 km per hour speed limit zones. And I'm looking forward to hearing the international case studies on achieving this initiative. The 30 km per hour speed limit is a key touchstone of the safe speed intervention in Ireland's road safety strategy. Action 6 of the safety strategy calls for the establishment of a working group to examine and review the framework for the setting of speed limits. As part of this review, specific consideration will be given to the introduction of a 30 km default speed limit in urban areas. And I'm pleased to say that the work of this group is well underway and that the group should make its recommendations before the end of this year. Incorporating the programme for government commitment to achieving Vision Zero, that is eliminating deaths and serious injuries on our roads by 2050, as an interim measure on the journey to this laudable objective, the government's current road safety strategy commits to reducing deaths and serious injuries on Ireland's road network by half by the year 2030. Before I finish, I would like to refer to the recent anti-speeding campaign by the RSA. This campaign highlights the fact that speeding doesn't make any sense when you consider the marginal time savings that you make. On an average journey of just under 14 kilometres, speeding by 10 kilometres per hour in an 80 kilometre speed zone will save you just 68 seconds in time. Ask yourself, is it worth it to risk a life for just a few seconds of time? If, after midnight tonight, you are detected speeding, you will now be liable to an increased fine of €160. Can you really afford this outlay, particularly during these challenging cost of living times? Wouldn't you rather spend your hard-earned money on the weekly shop than paying a speeding fine? especially when speeding doesn't really get you to your destination any quicker. Also, in terms of reducing your fuel consumption and the costs associated with such, it's worth noting that by driving within the speed limit, you're also using less fuel than you would if you were speeding. There is no doubt that driving within the speed limit is more cost-effective on many levels and, of course, is much safer for those who share the road with you, especially our more vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists. I'll conclude by mentioning that we have to remember that we are not a collection of individuals, but a community, each one of us imbued with a responsibility to ensure that we look out for one another on our road network, so that all road users, cyclists, pedestrians and motorists feel safe while travelling on our roads, confident in the knowledge of returning home safe and sound each day to our loved ones. And I would appeal to all of our citizens to stay within the speed limit set for the road you are travelling along and to drive at an appropriate speed for the prevailing road conditions. This simple advice will undoubtedly improve your response times to react to unexpected events or obstacles in the road and makes the road safer for all of us. Please remember to slow down and drive safely. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to Liz and Minister Norton. I understand that the Minister has to leave for parliamentary business, so we'd really like to thank her for taking the time to be here today. Thank you, Minister. Okay, so now we're moving on to the first speaker session of the conference, Understanding Speeding. And I'd like to introduce the first speaker in that session, the CEO of the Road Safety Authority, Sam Wade. He'll begin proceedings and he will start by giving us the lay of the land and the Irish perspective on speeding. Sam.
Thank you, Oliver, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people in the room. Welcome to also people who are virtual online as well. And the Minister has had to rush off, but it was great that the Minister made time to actually join us and not only confirm what the announcement in terms of speeding and the fines, but actually the commitment at a ministerial level and a government to road safety. If I may just take a few slides to really share the wider context and then some more detail, and which I'll expand on that the Minister and Liz has touched upon. To put it into context, Ireland, we're now in the middle of our fifth government road safety strategy. We launched it late in 2021, and at the heart of that strategy is the safe system approach. 7 areas which have been outlined already, and 15 safety performance indicators. In terms of the strategy, over the course of up to 2030, there are 3 phases, 21 to 24, 25 to 27, and 28 to 30. Those are specifically designed so that not only do we have clear actions for us as agencies, as organisations, as departments to actually deliver, but also that we can actually revisit and refresh and change actions and interventions if we need to up the pace of change that actually ultimately will reduce collisions, serious injuries and fatalities. 2030, the target and government commitment and RSA and all the agencies and departments involved have committed to a 50% reduction by 2030 in deaths and serious injuries. And the vision, 2050, vision zero deaths and serious injuries. At a recent conference, one of the delegates made the comment, 2050 is such a long way away. But actually, my take on 2050 is that our young people coming out of university, in jobs, or coming out of school and doing apprenticeships, all of those people are in their 20s working. They will be our leaders in 2050. So we owe it to them to actually deliver interventions now and over the coming years so that that 2050 Vision Zero is achievable. So let me summarize in terms of the governance. And what I'll say here is that who is involved? This is a cross-government department strategy. Transport, justice, education, health. Agencies involved, Road Safety Authority and Garda Síochána, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, National Transport Authority, the Court Service, Health and Safety Authority. The list goes on. So the agencies, the people that are there to commit and deliver are in the governance room. And it is reporting then to ministers on progress against all of those 7 areas. But most importantly is actually the communities and the people. And through the County and City Management Association and the local council's representative within that governance structure and within that partnership board is actually engaging and listening to and implementing interventions that communities feel will make their community safer, their roads safer. The Minister said already, everyone wants our roads to be safer. And it's important that we don't lose sight of actually who can help us do that the most, and that's actually the people in the communities, working with, in partnership with the agencies and getting that support. So the targets. By 2024, 15% reduction in fatalities, 10% reduction in serious injuries. By 2030, a 50% reduction both in fatalities and serious injuries. But to do that, we need to reduce the number of collisions. And if there is a collision, then the interventions to try to reduce the seriousness of that injury and ultimately the loss of life. Today we're here to focus in specifically on speed being one of the 7 safe systems. And this has been proven across the world. Other governments, our fellow EU member countries, have likewise strategized all the actions under the safe system approach. So it is a proven approach, and other countries are doing likewise. So let's look at some more of the statistics. The importance of safe speeds. Driving at excessive speed increases the likelihood of a collision. And the World Health Organization has said that they estimate 5% reduction in average speed could result in a 30% reduction in fatal collision. So what does that mean? Well, actually, if you're traveling on a road that has a speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour, what does that mean? 4 kilometers per hour. Or if you're in a stretch of road at a 100 kilometers per hour speed zone, 5 kilometers per hour. And then when you come into urban areas, the difference between a 50 kilometer and a transformational 30 kilometer. And our speaker, one of our speakers today and others will cover this topic of 30 kilometers per hour, particularly reducing that serious injury aspect and fatality in urban areas. So those are small margins. The Minister referred to small margins. But actually, and people may brush off small margins and say, well, it's only 4 kilometers per hour or 5 kilometers per hour. But families who have lost loved ones, families who have members who have a serious injury as a result of speeding, the blue light services and Garda Síochána, who are here today and speaking, are medics. They witness serious injuries and fatalities due to speeding, including those small margins. So let me summarize in some of the actions, and again, the Minister and Liz touched on some of these areas, but In the first phase of the strategy, there's 50 high-impact actions have been identified and 136 supporting actions, all of which are programmed and scheduled to be, to be delivered between now and 2024. The working group to actually set up the review of the speed limits, including, not exclusive, including the 30-kilometre speed limit in urban areas. And those recommendations and specific considerations are due at the end of this year, December. As you can see, there's multiple agencies involved across multiple departments. In this particular action in Garda Síochána, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the County and City Management Association on behalf of local councils and local authorities, and the National Transport Authority. The Department of Transport, and in this case RSA, are leading on that particular one. Action 7, the task force, in terms of identifying actions to reverse the trend of non-compliance. And again, it's a multi-agency, cross-departmental effort to identify, well, how can we prioritise actions and bring them forward to deliver change that people will see in their communities on our roads. Expanding the speed management measures. The Minister mentioned it in regard to schools, and this is something that periodic speed limits outside of schools, whether it's in an urban area, built-up area, or whether it's in a rural area. And the average speed cameras. I'm looking forward to other international speakers today, and not just on specifics, but actually the change in behaviour. Ireland has achieved the change in behaviour. In 2022, we launched an average speed camera on the M7. In the first 2 weeks, the behaviour changed to a sense that the level of compliance was 99.7%. The traffic slowed down. The behaviour slowed down, which can only be a good thing. And we need more of that. We've got 100,000 kilometres of national roads and more. And there is a need to expand that network. It's visible policing, but it's actually using technology and calming, a calming effect and changing behaviour in a positive way. Action 9 focuses on mobile safety camera systems. And in Garda Síochána, again, leading that particular action, and with support from the Road Safety Authority, the CCMA, and the local authorities. And again, at the heart of that is actually leveraging technology to help make our roads safer. And Action 10 is public education. But it's not just about awareness campaigns, about radio ads. It's actually about working with schools, working with community groups, working with older persons groups to actually encourage that education of what is safe behaviour, and in this case speeding, and the need to reduce our speeds on our roads. So those are a couple of examples. You'll be glad that I'm not going to go through all 186 actions, but that gives you a flavour particularly of the actions that are focusing in on speed and actions and interventions for speed. So for me, it's for RSA, it's those where we really do need that, not just the buy-in, but we need the engagement with everyone. And we do have that mechanism in place. We have the governance in place. We have the framework in place. We've identified actions, and it really is an ask for everyone, as leaders, as politicians, as local TDs, as community group leaders, leaders within education, leaders within health. It really is that open invite to get involved to help reduce speeds on our roads. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was a really interesting talk highlighting the prominent role of tackling speeding in the Irish road safety strategy. So I'd now like to introduce the next speaker, Velma Burns, Research Manager at the Road Safety Authority, and she'll give a profile of speeding in Ireland, and I'm sure this will provide some food for thought for everyone in the room. Velma.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to present an overview of some of the Irish data that the RSA holds in relation to speeding. So these are the data sources that I'm going to cover this morning. We look at the collision data and what speed limits of the roads are where people have been killed and seriously injured to set the scene. Then I look at some speed compliance and in particular high levels of non-compliance from our observational surveys. And then I'll share a selection of statistics from a new online survey of motorists that we conducted very recently, only in October of this year. And finally, we'll look at the coronial data that we have access to from the Health Research Board to look at driver fatalities over a 5-year period who exceeded a safe speed. So quite a lot to get through. So just to set the scene, first of all, here on the left-hand side, you can see the speed limit of the road where road users have been killed. And what we can see here is that the vast majority, 72%, have been killed over the period 2018 to 2021 on rural roads, and they're the higher speed roads. And in particular, the greatest share of those fatalities are occurring on 80-kilometre roads. When we look at serious injuries, the picture is quite different. We've less than half being seriously injured on rural roads, and the red box stands out in particular. So almost half are seriously injured on 50k roads. So here, when we look at the breakdown of road user type seriously injured, important to note that approximately 8 in 10 of cyclists and pedestrians are in fact seriously injured on our urban roads, on 50k roads, and that makes sense. These are more densely populated areas with vulnerable road users, and this is where motorists need to be very mindful of their speed and the impact of inappropriate speed and excessive speed in potentially causing a serious injury to a vulnerable road user. So moving on then to look at the issue of non-compliance. I'm afraid this isn't moving. Here we go, sorry. So we have, in the RSA, have been conducting observational surveys of drivers' free speed for a number of years. And how we define free speed is the speed that a driver chooses to travel when unconstrained by congestion, by traffic, by roadworks, or by road geometry. So this really gives a very good indication of drivers' voluntary choice of speed. So at an overall level in 2018, we saw that just over half of drivers on urban roads were driving in excess of the posted speed limit. So I'd just like you to think about that stat for a moment. 1 in every 2 drivers exceeding the posted speed limit in urban areas. And just by way of comparison, we know that compliance in go-safe zones is up at in excess of 99%, so almost universal compliance. That really points to the fact that safety cameras do work and are very effective. But of course, there can't be a safety camera on every street corner. In the rural roads, we have a lower level of non-compliance. Thankfully, that's at 27%. Looking back at the historic data, apologies, this doesn't appear to be working very well. So we have historic data going back to 2012, and in the red line you can see the rate of speeding on 50k national roads, and it's clear that historically there's a very consistent picture at on average, about 8 in 10 motorists on 50k roads driving in excess of the speed limit. So this is an area that we simply must tackle, and it is a very persistent issue. More recently, in 2021, we have conducted another survey. So instead of using the handheld speed guns that were done for the previous survey, we've used automatic traffic counter data to measure drivers' free speed. And still, in the more recent study that was done in 2021, we saw very high levels of non-compliance. So on 50k roads, we found that 77% of drivers were found to have driven in excess of the posted speed limit of 50k. Interestingly, when we looked at the data from the weekends, non-compliance was even higher, at 80% non-compliance. We also have data on the degree to which motorists were speeding, and overall 50% of motorists exceeded the speed limit by up to 10 kilometres, and a third of motorists exceeded the speed limit by between 10 and 20 kilometres. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try that. So similarly, we have looked at speed compliance on higher speed roads, on 100k roads and motorways, and we saw thankfully a lower level of non-compliance. Again, this is from automatic traffic counter data, and this came from Transport Infrastructure Ireland. So we saw 29% of all vehicles were speeding during weekdays, and on motorways 15% exceeding the speed limit. So again, thankfully lower levels relative to the motorways. Now I'm going to move on to a new survey that we conducted in October of this year. It was a nationally representative survey of over 1,000 weekly car drivers, and it was conducted online, and this is our national survey on speed. So the key questions that we have explored in this preliminary analysis is, first of all, what is the profile of those who speed and who don't speed? What factors influence a driver's decision to speed, and what factors influence a driver's decision not to speed? And ultimately, what would make motorists stop speeding? And finally, just because it's quite topical, I present the results from this survey in relation to what extent do motorists support doubling the fines for speeding. So the first question looks at the prevalence of speeding in this survey, and the way we asked this question was, in the past 12 months, how often may you have exceeded 50k speed limits by less than 10 kilometres, exceeded 100k speed limits by less than 10 kilometres, or indeed exceeded either of these speed limits by more than 10 kilometres? And the results from this survey show that approximately 2/3 of motorists, 64%, agree that they have exceeded the speed limit as per at least one of these statements in the last 12 months with some degree of frequency. That's very often, or sometimes. So this group of 2/3 of the motorists in the sample, I'm going to refer to as speeders from now on. The more compliant motorists then, that represents 36% of our sample, and they say that they rarely or never exceeded the speed limits per at least one of these statements. So interesting then to look at the profile of our speeders and non-speeders as per this definition. And what we see is that our speeders are more likely to be apologies, but this really isn't working for me. They're more likely to be male, 25 to 34 years old, and they're more likely to be in the more affluent social grades. And they're also more likely to be in the pre-family life stage. So all of this points to younger male drivers and more affluent. Those who rarely or never speed are more likely to be in the They're more likely to be older, they're more likely to be in the lower socio-demographic groups. Okay, so now let's move on to look at the reasons why motorists speed. And how we asked this question is that we presented a series of statements to motorists and we asked them to rate to what extent they agreed or disagreed with each of these statements. And what we found is that there was a disparate range of justifications that drivers put forward to rationalise their speeding. So 1 in 2 drivers say that they've never had a crash while driving, and that's used as a justification to continue speeding. And then similarly, 1 in 2 say that some speed limits on 80k roads are too low. And perhaps that taps into a lack of understanding of how and why speed limits are set for particular road types. Then 1 in 3 say that I'm unlikely to get caught by the police, so tapping into enforcement or indeed by a speed camera. 1 in 4 say that we're tapping into social norms here. 1 in 4 state that every driver in my area speeds or my friends regularly speed. And then 1 in 10 say my family regularly speed and I don't know anyone who has been in a crash. So a whole host of justifications being put forward there. So then let's look at the results from non-speeders, and to see what, to try and tap into their understanding as to why they are much more compliant. So what we saw in the results here is that 4 key themes are endorsed by over 9 in 10 non-speeders. And each of these themes are equally highly endorsed by the non-speeders. So there seems to be a range of factors driving the decision not to speed, and they're all on parity, really. So the first theme is to reject the premise. So non-speeders feel, well, they don't need to speed, and anyway, there are no time savings to be gained. There's a moral or legal argument that they want to do the right thing, and anyway, it's illegal. Safety comes very much to the fore also. It's dangerous, there's a risk of crash, I might hurt myself or others. And then, of course, there's the fear of sanction, which is very strong. They don't want to get penalty points, they don't want to get caught, and it might affect their insurance. So then we wanted to understand, well, what factors would encourage or persuade drivers who speed to stop? And what we saw here is that the top four reasons given all relate to enforcement. And then, this is not moving on, apologies. And the next most endorsed reasons relate to crash involvement. So if I was a driver involved in a speed-related crash, that would make me stop. And really, that is quite drastic when you think about it. Then we have risk awareness, that there should be more public awareness of the dangers of speeding. And then there's social norms also, if there was influence or pressure from family. So it's interesting that looking at all of it's almost like the motorists, the speeders, are looking for external factors to persuade them to speeding. And there seems to be a lack of personal responsibility. So that is something that we need to be aware of in our messaging to motorists in relation to speeding. You may note that down at the very bottom there we have nothing can persuade me to stop or reduce speeding. So thankfully the proportion is quite small, just 3%. So now I'm going to move on to the analysis of, oh, apologies, one of my slides jumped. So as I mentioned earlier, given that this is so topical, just to present the results from again, it was in the same survey, but we asked participants to what extent they support or object to doubling the current fine for speeding from €80 to €160. And we saw in this survey that support for this is just under half. 46% said they support this measure, and a third, 34%, said they object to this measure. When we looked at the demographic analysis, there were some interesting results, and we must bear in mind that, as I said earlier, in this sample we have 2/3 of this sample of motorists who are speeders. So we saw that support was significantly higher among the older age group, 65 plus, and also among non-speeders. And really the objection was statistically significantly higher among speeders, which is intuitive. So now I'm going to move on to the data that we have from coronial files from the Health Research Board, and I'll look at driver fatalities who exceeded a safe speed over the 5-year period 2014 to 2018. So the Health Research Board, just by way of background, they collect road traffic collision fatalities data annually on behalf of the RSA from closed coronial files using the Drug-Related Deaths Index, or NDRDI methodology. So this analysis focuses on RTC fatalities that occurred over the period 2014 to 18, and the coronial files generally contain a series of files which are listed there, including the FCI report, the coroner's verdict, and toxicology reports. So we have coronial data for 365 of the 444 drivers killed on Irish roads over this time period. And for 344 of these driver fatalities, we have a record of their action prior to the fatal collision. So 24% of the 344 drivers with a record of their action were documented as exceeding safe speed. 65% of these speeding driver fatalities were private car drivers and 27% were motorcycle drivers. So of these 83 driver fatalities who were exceeding a safe speed, we also have a record of other actions that were documented in the file, and these include losing control, failing to negotiate a bend, or going to the wrong side of the road. And intuitively, you can see how all of these can happen when a driver is exceeding a safe speed. Looking at the profile of the driver fatalities who were exceeding a safe speed, we can see that the overwhelming majority, around 90%, were male. And looking at the age profile, we can see that, again, the majority, that's 7 in 10, were young male drivers under the age of 35. We also have data in relation to these driver fatalities who exceeded a safe speed in relation to their seatbelt wearing and also their toxicology results. And what we found in this analysis was that there was a higher level of non-seatbelt wearing and also positive toxicology for alcohol relative to drivers who were not speeding. So 54% of those driver fatalities were not wearing a seatbelt, and normally we see that figure around 1 in 4. And 53% of these driver fatalities who had exceeded a safe speed had a positive toxicology for alcohol, and normally we see that figure around 37%. Looking at the collision profile for these collisions where a driver fatality exceeded a safe speed, we saw that 97 people died and 51 people were injured in the 83 fatal collisions where a driver exceeded a safe speed. 72% of these fatal collisions occurred during the weekend time period from Friday into Monday, and almost half of these collisions occurred in the evening into the early morning. And the vast majority, 73%, occurred on rural roads, so that's the higher speed roads. So just to summarise, based on the various data sources that I looked at this morning, a range of Irish studies indicate that speeding is a persistent road safety issue. Safe speed is a critical intervention area in the government road safety strategy, and we do need strategies to challenge the perceived acceptability of speeding. Urban road non-compliance is of particular concern, especially in the context of serious injuries among vulnerable road users. Coronial data indicate that speeding driver fatalities were most likely to be young, male, and on rural roads. Drink driving and non-seatbelt wearing often coexist. And then finally, just to say that further analysis of the results from the National Survey on Speed will inform the development of evidence-based interventions, and also we hope it will inform an in-depth qualitative research study on the topic of speeding, which we hope to conduct next year. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Velma, for providing that insight into what's going on, and really worrying numbers about how non-compliance with speeding overlaps with non-compliance on other aspects of driving. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is going to join us, I think, pre-recorded from Australia. She's Judy Fleiter, Global Manager at the Global Road Safety Partnership. And she's going to draw on her 20 years of research experience and work in the field of road user behaviour to discuss the human motivations for speed choices on the road. Judy, or Phil.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually, and I'm sorry I'm not able to join you in person. My name is Dr. Judy Fleiter, and I'm here representing the Global Road Safety Partnership. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm very grateful to the conference organisers for inviting me to be part of your conference. Firstly, in person in 2020, we were that close, and what disappointment that was on my part to not be able to be with you. I was actually in the airport about to board a flight when I received the news that the conference was being delayed. So here we are, and thank you to the organisers for allowing me to contribute at least virtually this year. I would like to start the presentation just by telling you a little bit about the Global Road Safety Partnership, in case you're not familiar with us. We're a hosted program as part of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the largest humanitarian organisation in the world. We're a little over 20 years old, and we're a member-based organisation. Our members represent the corporate sector, government, and the NGO sector. And you can see that our vision and mission there on the screen, a world free from road crash, death and injury. And our focus is largely in low and middle income countries. I'm currently speaking to you from the east coast of Australia, the state of Queensland. My background is in road safety research. For 15 years, I was part of a team at the Centre for Accident Research and Road Safety, Queensland, in Brisbane, Australia. And my doctoral and postdoctoral work focused mostly on factors influencing people's speed choice, among other risk factors, but most of my research is based in the area of speeding. And for the last 6 years, I've had the pleasure of leading the team at the Global Road Safety Partnership that contributes to work in 15 countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, where we have a road policing capacity building program, a road safety and a legislative advocacy program, and a road safety leadership course. So it's with that background that I speak to you today. I've chosen to highlight 4 key challenges that keep recurring in my work, and I've used the phrase, as you can see there on the slide, we are only human, and we are all only human. This is a human factors based presentation. 4 key challenges in relation to human beings are ever present in my work, and so I wanted to spend a little time talking about each of them. The fact that we're not good at assessing what is risky for us, the fact that we don't always see laws as fair or necessary, that changing our attitudes and behaviours can take a long time and a lot of resources, and finally that we're very complex creatures, and so the things that motivate us are quite complex as well. So to spend a little bit of time talking about the first one, that we are not very good at assessing what is risky for us. We have a general lack of understanding, I think, of what risks we face when we use the road. And I've used the phrase there, the speed paradox. In fact, the first scientific paper I ever wrote was about the speed paradox, and it was describing the fact that in a sample of the population that we looked at in Australia, people at the same time would report understanding that speeding was risky, but also that they speed. And so that's the great paradox. I do this behaviour, but I understand that it's dangerous or risky. And so that's quite a difficult concept to try and tackle when there are competing interests inside one person. And just to highlight some other areas, I think, related to poor risk assessment, certainly our understanding of vehicle speeds and the distance it will take to stop that vehicle, and then not so related to speeding, but speeding is linked to some of these other behaviours, and that is our level of impairment when we are intoxicated. Either we're impaired by drugs, alcohol, fatigue, or we're distracted by something, and speed can play a role there in increasing the risk if we are impaired. And I think there's also we have a fairly poor understanding of the impact of kinetic energy, the forces that apply to our body when a crash occurs. And I'll draw on some work from one of the countries in Asia where we've been working to support in-country partners to implement or to develop and then implement a new child restraint law. And one of the challenges that we had in trying to bring the community along to understand the need for a child restraint law was to try and change the misperception about people being able to safely hold a child in their arms in the event of a crash. There was really very little understanding of just how strong the impact forces are when vehicles collide. And so I use that phrase, we are only human. And many things have improved in the field of road safety over many decades. The improvement in vehicles, in road infrastructure and road surfaces, the improvements that technology has brought to the field. But there's one thing that hasn't changed in that time, one thing that remains the same, and that is our ability to survive physical force. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Graham. Graham is an invention. He's an artistic work. Actually, you can see him there on the screen. A piece of work conducted by the Transport Accident Commission in Victoria, Australia. He was a collaboration between an artist and a trauma surgeon and an engineer. So Graham was designed to show people what the human body would have to look like if we were to survive some of the impact forces in a crash. And I think that's a unique way of showing that we haven't evolved to a point where we can withstand the kinetic energy forces. The second challenge I draw upon a lot is that laws are not always seen as fair or necessary. And just linking back to the first point, if we don't understand what risks we face on the road, then we may not actually agree that a law is necessary to modify our behaviour to address that risk. So explaining risks and options to keep people safe can help in that regard. It won't necessarily work for everybody, but public education campaigns certainly have a role to play. Police communication to the community also has a role to play, explaining the need for a law, why the police are enforcing the law, even explaining the basics of what a helmet is and why a proper helmet is important and necessary to protect the head, the brain and the neck. And in some jurisdictions, we're seeing people redefine automated enforcement. I've got a note there on the slide, safety cameras, not speed cameras. And in some jurisdictions, safety cameras, that terminology is starting to be used to kind of change the narrative about why a piece of technology is being deployed on the road. Driver and rider training, I think, can also be helpful, although I'll touch upon that in the next couple of slides about what information we give to novice drivers and why it may not necessarily help keep them safe. And the final point is about role modelling. Just in the work we do with senior road police in various countries, it's important that they model good behaviour, because if they're seen by the population as not complying with the law, it's very easy to understand why the population would not see that law as fair or necessary if the police are also not complying with it. The third one is about changing attitudes and behaviour, and just how resource intensive and that is, and how long it takes. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that evidence has demonstrated to us quite a lot that robust policing, enforcement and sustained communications campaigns can change behaviour. Sometimes the behaviour might change first, attitudes might take a little while to change afterwards, and I've just got an example here of how that process might work. This might be different for individuals and also perhaps different across behaviours, but here's an example of me saying that I will comply with the speed limit only because I don't want to get caught and penalised, not because I agree that speeding is dangerous. So my behaviour is one thing, but my attitude is not matching that behaviour. And then over time, perhaps my attitude might change to a point where I now believe, I have a positive attitude towards the fact that I need to obey the speed limit. And then at some point after that, perhaps we get to what I would consider the gold standard, I guess, and that is that I voluntarily choose to comply with the law, that I'm sort of moral acceptance of what that law tells me to do. So I agree with the law, I obey the law, irrespective of what the penalty might be if I was to not obey that law. And so creating the moral imperative to comply, we know that enforcement and education have helped shape societal attitudes. I think we're not there yet in relation to speeding, but certainly in many jurisdictions around the world, we've seen that full circle of change in things like restraint use, seatbelt wearing, drink driving, for example. And so there's just reinforcing the point that enforcement can assist with long-term behaviour and attitudinal change. And that the point on the previous slide was that sometimes enforcement brings the behaviour change first, even though attitudes may not yet have changed. And I think that's where we are potentially in the field of speed management. And the final challenge is related to us and how complex we are. We're complex creatures, and therefore our behaviour is complex. And particularly so when our behaviours are related to an addiction. So the two points I have there are alcohol and drug addiction. I realise that's not specifically related to the theme of today's conference, which is speeding, but just suffice to say that there are a range of things that are difficult to modify. And so trying to modify a drink driver's behaviour when they are actually an alcoholic, addicted to alcohol or addicted to drugs, can be very, very challenging. The second point there is that educating someone does not necessarily mean that they will automatically change their behaviour, if only it was that simple. So telling novice drivers about the risks that they face on the road may seem on face value like a good idea, but we know that people report being aware of the risks but still undertake the behaviour. So that's not necessarily going to be the answer. Just as school-based education for young children, and educating them about the risks that they face when riding their bicycle or using public transport, getting off on a busy roadside, telling them about the risks won't necessarily stop children being impulsive and running onto the road when their friend kicks the soccer ball in front of them, for example. And I'm sure you're aware that we are motivated by many things as individuals. So I've just listed some of them here. I'm sure there are many more, but in terms of motivations for speeding, we're many of people using the road with you and me today are high on the sensation-seeking scales and are risk takers. They're seeking thrills. People have a wide range of misperceptions about speeding. I've listed 3 common ones there that we face in our daily work. Misperceptions about how much time can be saved, the fact that people believe they can control a vehicle at speed, and that they have the ability to decide what is safe for them. The next point listed there is peer pressure, and it's very well documented how strong that can be in motivating risky behaviour. Fatalistic beliefs is another in some countries where fatalistic beliefs are very present and very strong. People report to us that they feel that there's nothing they can do. Their actions on the road make no difference because the outcome of their day, which may be their death, is predetermined by a higher force. And so anything that they do, any actions they take, they see that they, A, are not responsible for them, and B, are also not responsible for the outcome. Concerns for personal safety. There's an example I'll use from our work in Latin America. We were talking with a group of people about what motivates them to speed or to comply with the speed limit. In fact, a partner organisation was undertaking that work. And people were talking about their safety on the road. And so were we. But we were talking about it in the traditional road safety sense. They were talking about it in terms of personal safety. And they used the example of carjacking. And so traveling through a city at night time, we were asking them why they would not comply with the speed limit. And for them, they had to get through that particular part as quickly as possible. So by speeding, to avoid the risk of being a victim of carjacking. The next point is about perceptions people have of when the police will actually enforce the speed limit, the enforcement tolerance threshold, which can set up the idea of a de facto speed limit in the minds of people. So they believe they can travel a certain number of kilometres or a certain percentage above the speed limit before they will be infringed by police. And then a point there about repeat speeders, repeat high range speeders. I was part of a team here in Queensland some years ago where we followed the history, the driving history, traffic history of high range speeding offenders, and were able to link their criminal history as well. And there was a greater proportion of traffic offending and criminal offending among high range speeders. And so the motivations for them are not just linked to road use, but also to other criminal activity. And the final point there on the slide relates to community norms. And as a motivator for not complying with the speed limit, it's very common. I hear it in many countries. I'm sure you hear it in your country, that everybody speeds, as if that's a justification for me to be able to not observe the speed limit. And colleagues in Ireland shared with me a few years ago the results of your 2018 free speed study that showed categorically that that is not true. You can see percentages per road type on the screen there of the proportion of the driving population that was speeding on any particular road. That mirrors other speed surveys that I've seen in various jurisdictions. That shows that actually it's false to believe that everybody is speeding. That's a very difficult argument, however, to convince people of, even though the statistics bear that out, as you can see on the slide in front of you. And so to conclude, as a final thought, I'm going to pose a question to you. You know that in the safe system approach, we put human frailty at the centre. And the safe system approach is mindful of our ability to make mistakes, the fact that a human being will always make an error of judgment. And if that's the system that we are hoping to define for ourselves, then here is the question. What system would we have created for ourselves if we had considered human frailty at the centre? And actually, as you know, many urban spaces are still being developed. There is huge urban sprawl around the world. We are still creating and spreading out in our city areas. And so I'll rephrase the question: what system will we create for ourselves that puts human frailty at the centre and focuses on managing speeds that allow our bodies to survive? I think that is the challenge for all of us, to create a landscape and a transport network that focuses on the human being. I'd like to just share some references here. If the slides are being shared, there's references there to the work that I've made note of during the presentation. And finally, I would like to thank you for your attention, to again thank the conference organisers for allowing me to present and be part of your session today, and to wish you all the very best for the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Fleiter for highlighting the moral imperative, why people speed, and the role of speed and speed compliance in safe system, and how we can make sure that people aren't killed through our policies. So now I'd like to invite everyone to the coffee break, which is just outside the hall. We're going to resume in 15 minutes, and don't forget to think about your questions for the speakers. Thank you.